what's inconvenient would be the better word, is that when you recognize a story of like, oh, I'm telling myself a story about reality that I realize is a unique one to myself, and then you go to try to clean it up. And here's where, once again, psychedelics can be a great tool, or just a really good mentor or a counselor, or just friends, or being very self-reflective, is that as you start to uncoil those stories, there's a little bit of identity death that has to happen with that, because you've built your identity surrounding that. So it takes a extreme level of courage to be able to go in, and even surrounding success or what it means to be like competent, or what you've built, to the story you've told yourself about insecurity and how you're going to solve that. When you go in there and delayer it, you'll start to recognize, at least from my experience, you'll recognize that a lot of what you're doing in reality is a result of a story that you no longer want. So then not only does the story have to change, your actions have to change.
You're listening to the Born Primitive podcast. All right, part 2. So
hopefully we didn't break the thread we had going.
Yeah. Well, for those that are tuning in, go listen to part 1. We're doing a 3-part closeout series on the podcast. So I'll just leave it at that. But we were, I guess getting way off track on business, but talking on the personal side. But really, Tony, just what I was saying about at some point, like, if it doesn't feel natural to you to be doing all these things that maybe like you're reading in books and you're seeing on these like really good there's so much good information out there that is valuable to refining your own ways and providing different perspectives. And I think experimenting with those things, and of course, anytime it's a healthy habit, like doing a sauna, of course, that's a healthy habit. Reading the Bible, journaling, cold plunging, hydrating in the morning, getting natural sunlight. These are all very positive things. It doesn't say we shouldn't be doing it, but I think if we overdo it and we forget about what makes us unique and what kind of drives us, it's not going to feel natural. And you're doing it, you're going to, like for me, I was doing it almost like to check a box. Okay, this is the pathway to a healthy, balanced life. But if deep in my soul and in my spirit, I don't feel like I'm thriving or I'm alive, and I kind of like these last couple of weeks, I'm like, what makes me alive is to fucking compete, right? In whatever that is. If it was playing football, if it, whatever, that's when when it turns that instinctive switch on me, and I'm like, yes, let's go. And it provides me with a source of energy. I don't want to say is endless, but it allows me to tap into a gas tank that like normally I don't have access to, right? So if you can, hit on that, you can, achieve a lot. So, I'm reflecting on that now. Do I just need to go back to the way I was that got me here in the first place? But then there's there's all kinds of ways to look at this, because I was, listening to a podcast and about leadership and running businesses and stuff. And the guy brought up a really good point about you should be setting your organization up a way to make you irrelevant, right? And we should actually all be doing this. So you should be trying to do that. And if everyone's doing that, you're preparing the people below you to do your job and making you less and less relevant. So part of, one could make the counter argument, hey man, you've done enough to kind of make yourself irrelevant. And thank God, we have so many talented people here now that I do think that is mostly true at this point. I mean, I think I'm pretty good at like a few good ideas per year that are strategic and kind of like brand initiative. Like, I think that's where probably my strength lies. But, for the most part, this thing's on autopilot with everything you guys are doing. And so, one can make the argument, hey man, you don't need to do that anymore. You've earned the right to not be doing emails at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I get that, but if that's what makes you feel alive, then just lean into it. Kind of like the John Rambo. Remember when the Colonel's telling Rambo, like, this is who you are. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, that's my really nerdy analogy to maybe.
Of course, it's a Rambo.
That's right. So I guess I'll pause there, let you respond. But I'm kind of in that limbo right now of reflecting on what is that balance look like for me. And hey, on an evening where I'm alone, is it okay to fire up the computer at 7 o'clock and work till 11 and go to bed? Because I know when I do that, I feel accomplished and I feel like I'm competing. Particularly because I always frame it in the terms of like, what are my competitors doing right now in this moment? Like, what's the CEO of name brand X, whatever, insert generic brand name that we compete against? What are they doing right now? You know what I mean? Is that guy still at the office? You know what I mean? And I used to do this like in high school, training for football. Like, there's someone competing for a spot at the Division I level right now. What is that linebacker out there that I'll never meet? What is he doing right now in the middle of July at noon when it's 100 degrees out? I'm out on the track. I'm doing my part. But what is he? And when this workout ends, what's he going to go do? Is he going to go do deep tissue and like stretch and, you know what I mean? Or is he just going to leave the track and not do the shit he's supposed to do so he recovers for the next, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I was always, kind of in the back of my mind thinking about that unknown person out there that is my competitor. And that's what I do with Born Primitive. And maybe that's silly. But I take some of that shit personal. If you go in my office, there's some shit pinned up on the wall. That's my fucking bulletin board. That's the newspaper clipping, that, some fucking offensive coordinator said we're going to run it down their throats. And we're on defense saying, okay, we'll see you next week. You know what I mean? Throw that up on the bulletin board because we're coming, So yeah, I don't know. I've got to kind of going long now, but something for me to chew on and reflect on. And I think a lot of us might find ourselves in that limbo of kind of showing yourself grace and being able to tone it down when it's appropriate. But also, hey, man, if that's who you are, lean into it because it can provide a lot of cool opportunities. And if it's fulfilling to your own soul, then there's going to be a void if you don't do that, and just own it. And maybe that's how you need to be.
When I think that's the piece, and it relates back to what we talked about on part one, at least just from how I would start to unpack this, is actually a question before I even start is, have you inquired or reflected on where do you think that spark comes from? Meaning, was that spark always there even as a child, or do you notice that there was something that caused that spark to arise?
I'm pretty sure I pinpointed it. I think being the youngest of three brothers is the source of it. Both Mike and Matt were very accomplished athletes. Matt was conference MVP in all three sports, all state in all three sports. Mike was really good too. So like the third Hanlon comes rolling in. I was underdeveloped. I matured a little bit late, and there's like a little bit attached to that last name, in a town, like small town in India. You know what I mean? It's not like, and then I roll in, they're like, oh, that's the third one. Like we thought we were going to get another stud, and look at this guy. So I always had a chip on my shoulder because I could sense that, right? And it's like, oh, you're never going to be able to fill Matt's shoes, because he was a football player too, and was like everything, right? And even the coaches, like they coached Matt, and then like the littlest Hanlon, me, rolls in. And so that put the chip on my shoulder. And I even remember our defensive coordinator, who was my linebacker coach, who would end up being a huge mentor for me. And he ended up passing away, after my sophomore year. I was 6'1", 130 pounds. And I got a little bit of time on varsity, weak side, outside linebacker. But I was obviously undersized, slow as shit. I had decent instincts, but like that was about all I could hang my hat on, right? And we were in the weight room in the off season, and I remember because he was like the strength coach. He had like a weightlifting class you could take during the day, and he asked me like what I wanted to do, as far as like my accomplished in football, and I said I'm going to play Division I football, right? And he literally laughed at me, which he had a unique way of motivating you. And in hindsight, it was tough love. I don't know if him laughing at me was probably the most appropriate for a 16-year-old kid that was insecure. But I remember I literally walked out of his office. There's a little office in the middle of the weight room, and I went over to like the power clean platforms, and I just started fucking ripping power cleans like a maniac. And I will never forget that moment. I remember where he was sitting. I remember where I was standing, and as I walked out, I said, "Well, I'm gonna show you." And that was I had that chip on my shoulder. Almost, I would say there was anger in there. You know what I mean? Like it probably didn't express itself, but when I was working out, like I was working out mad. You know what I mean? Like, and I created this illusion that it's me against the world, and no, I got to prove myself. And most of that is bullshit. But there definitely was some people like, oh, like you're never going to be who your brother was. And that drove me. Now that's maybe an unhealthy thing to motivate you, but it worked. Because then I carried that right into Yale. Matt played at Yale, right? So to get there, and obviously by that point, if you're a Division I athlete, like your need to prove yourself goes down a little, because it's like, okay, I think I've done okay. You know what I mean? But I think that's where it's rooted, and just being the youngest brother. I mean, it could be that simple, just in your family dynamic. And they didn't do anything wrong. They were just really good at sports. And you know what I mean? So I was like, I felt I would have been a failure if I wasn't all state, you know, and I ended up obviously getting that and doing the thing. But, you know, when you're a 130-pound sophomore, but guess what that led to? You know, I'm leaving college 210, 6'2", 210. I was like, I'm going to live in the weight room. I'm going to eat like a horse. I was doing all the protein shakes at night and going out to the practice field and doing gassers and cone drills and 110s and butcher sled pushes, walking lunges around the track, studying tape in the off season. Like I was doing things that a normal high school kid wasn't even thinking about doing because I was just obsessed. And of course that leads to, you know, an actual achievement at the end of it. But it was fueled by, I got to prove them, you know?
When I think something I use often is what used to serve me that I still think serves me that no longer does. Because like within that, so like for yours, then the second layer that I always reflect on is, okay, what am I doing? And honestly, working out was one. And I've talked about this on the podcast where that served me as well. I was a little different. I was always very skinny, but I was very tall and very athletic, but very thin. So that served me for a while to just like grind in the weight room, eat a ton, go from 180 to 200 as a junior in high school. But then I recognized later in life that like that was still kind of running as a code in the back of my head. And the second layer that I referenced that I use as part of that inquiry is, okay, what am I doing that served me at one point that is just kind of outdated and no longer serves me and is not producing the same result? Then second to that, is that story based on a lack thereof? Meaning like, was there something that I thought I lacked that made me to do that? And it may even be true, meaning like, yes, I was thin. That was an objective measure. I was able to solve that to some degree, actually never, but like solve it to some degree by putting weight on. But what is the root of that? It's that I'm not good enough because I'm too skinny. Now, that's just that I'm being a bit dramatic just because like you could make the argument, well, you needed to gain weight in order to play Division I sport, there is a truth to that. But that root story was, and how I felt it, because it wasn't purely objective in my 14-year-old brain, meaning like it wasn't just like, okay, I feel really good in my body. I'm going to put 20 pounds on to be a Division I player. It was like, I'm too skinny. I'm like an insecurity surrounding it. I'm going to start to build my lifestyle around solving for that. I bring that up because for me, it was really helpful to recognize that is a void that will never get filled because that story is that I'm not enough. So you'll just keep recycling that and then projecting that onto reality and trying to solve it. It relates back to like, you're trying to solve an internal story through external validation and external actions. So for yours, it could be worth exploring. Like I always say, kill the old versions of you. Like never think going back to an old version of you is going to solve anything. That in my experience actually tends to make things a little more confusing and chaotic. It could be what parts of that action. So for you, like the working or just the achievement, what part of that still feels good? And then what part feels like it's coming from insecurity, and parse those out and say like, okay, the new version of me, I can still fucking achieve and compete, but it doesn't have to have this, I don't want to use the word nasty and put words in your mouth, but like this edge to it where like, if I don't do that, I'm not enough. Because there's where the same way of just buying shit and thinking that that's going to make you happy, thinking that you're going to achieve your way into happiness isn't going to work either. So, but there's where it's important too. It's like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If it truly if it ignites something in you that makes you feel grounded, not good, because a lot of times we can have things that like achievement feels good, but it's because it's a dopamine rush. And like, it's like, yeah, I achieved that. People are happy and giving me high fives, even in a subtle way. That's almost like an addiction where it works for you. And that's why I was laughing when you kicked off with like, because I went through the exact same thing where like I was taking all these supplements, I was doing all the routines, and I recognized the same thing as you is like, I'm trying to solve something through external modalities that needs solved within me. And then you turn the eye inward and say, okay, what is actually going on here? What actually makes me happy? What's making me feel not happy? What's making me feel a lack of focus? What's making me feel literally dis-ease, which is like how disease sets in, is you do a bunch of shit that you don't want to do. And then eventually your system's like, stop fucking doing this. And for you to, for when you turn that eye inward, it stops. Then you're like the sauna. We are addicted to that as a culture right now. And I'm guilty of that at times, is that I think there are foundational pillars, meaning your food, how you move, the water you drink, those things you should be not neurotic, but you should be kind of focused on those where, and it doesn't mean you're perfect, but for the most part, that's literally what's making the cells of your body. So like if you're putting shit in, you're going to get shit out. But then where we've become addicted to as a culture is thinking we're going to solve things through external, like the sauna, the cold tub. Those are great tools, but people, they actually get neurotic of maintaining their everyday state through external stimuli. Whereas what we talked about on the last one as well is, I think we as humans have the innate right to feeling grounded regardless of what's going on in the external. Now, chaos sets in at times. There are definitely seasons of life that are fucking hard, and that doesn't, but you don't need to lose your ground through that. Like you can truly be a tree where like, regardless of what the fuck the weather's going on, you're the same. Now, how you like your actions have to align with kind of the season you're in, but that's where like the whole thinking you should force your day to be something that somebody else said, throw that the fuck out. Because what I've found is when you're in tune with your own system, insights will come, or you'll meet somebody that like, say you build a friendship with somebody at church and you just really like the person for some reason, and you guys are out getting a coffee together, and he tells you that like, hey man, yeah, I've been doing, you've never heard of cold sits. Let's play out a scenario. And he says, yeah, I've really been doing cold sits. Like I've found that when you trust reality to bring you the next thing, it's way better than like constantly searching for it through internet, through online, even podcasts. Like that you just end up fucking piling too much stuff on, when in reality, what needed to happen was actually a delayering. It's like, what actually brings me joy? What actually makes me feel fulfilled? And for you, I think like that that's a great one. But then just going a layer into that, as I said, is to delayer the validation part of it and get into like, no, this just makes me be able to go to sleep better at night because it's fun. Like competing is fun. And could there be, because I know that's one for me too. And honestly, it's been a lack just the last 3 years, is that Max and I, he has a ping pong table over at the barn. If we play ping pong for 30 minutes, how I feel after that for a couple hours is insane. Pickleball, same thing. If I play pickleball for 30 minutes, if we play basketball for a couple minutes, it's crazy how much it's not aggressive competition, but we're competing, that does bring me a level of groundedness where then I realize like, whoa, I'm way happier now with my girls. But that doesn't, like, for me, that exact thing had to happen where there was a validate, like I sucked as a college athlete. I was worse as a college athlete than I was a high school athlete, because so much of it wasn't built around like, this is fun. It became like this like neurotic thing of like, oh, I need to perform, but my back's killing me. And I watched as I just fucking folded in half. So I think the maintaining, where I said, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, is like maintaining that competitive edge, but don't let it become something that becomes neurotic, because as soon as it's neurotic, the why behind you doing it, it's going to just exhaust you rather than actually bring you joy. So that's with the kind of like setting up your day. It's like, find the things that you actually want to do. And then too, have good people around you to say like, hey man, I know you're enjoying your day, but the way you're doing your day is fucking chaotic. Now, here's where you would need like best friends, or if your girl's old enough to be like, Dad, like, it's not fun for me when you're working all the time. Yeah. That's feedback then that you should start to take in, because we can all get out of balance too with like just being gluttonous and doing what you want to do all the time isn't the answer either. But there is an attunement that can happen when you recognize, especially like the reading and all, like the self-development world is so fucking ripe for this, of like, you're trying to force yourself to do something that actually isn't best for you anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, another thing I've thought about is and I think I teased this earlier, but if this is from this came up in Modern Wisdom, they're talking about the insecure hyperachiever.
Yep.
Did I already talk about that? Did I already mention it?
You mentioned it, but we didn't get into it.
Yeah. So, and they're talking about different kind of like personality types. And when they were talking about the insecure hyperachiever, I kind of laughed because like it seemed like pretty spot on. That, hey, no matter like how much you achieve on paper, that you still feel a little insecure in like in what you've actually accomplished in a way. Like maybe a sense that it's still a bit of a fluke. And this gets in, and this is what I want to dive into a little bit, is like the idea of imposter syndrome. We've talked about it on the podcast before, but as I look back and like every phase of the different things I've done in my life, I've pretty much had imposter syndrome in every one of those. So, you know, when I'm playing football at Yale, there's definitely imposter syndrome. It's particularly when you show up and you're a freshman. You remember, you know, there's always these guys that are 3-4 years older than you. And as a young man, that's a big development gap. They've been in a college weight room for 3 years. They're bigger, they're stronger. You know, they've played at the pace of the game, which is way faster when you get to that next level. And so you're adjusting to all these things. Physiologically, you're usually not at that level, the speed of the game. So you show up having been all state, all everything, and then all of a sudden you're like, I don't think I belong here. Like, these guys are way better. You know what I mean? And you have to go through that, you know, and then, you know, as you get more senior year, a lot of times that confidence will come back a little bit. But, you know, you could be senior year and starting, you're one of the best 11 guys on the team, and you still think like, I don't know, you know? And then, you know, same thing, you know, in the SEAL teams, right? It's like you get into like a platoon and, you know, all these fucking badasses, man. And, you know, dudes, big, you know, burly dudes with tattoos and, you know what I mean? And they're hitters. And you're like, oh man, like I'm not a badass like that guy. Like, I'm not sure. And you know what I mean? And I'm sure a lot of them are thinking the same thing about you. Right. And it's this weird, like, no, dude, like you do freaking belong. You know what I mean? Like, you were one of 11 people out of like 200 some that like why would you think now that you've somehow slipped through the cracks? Like, statistically, that's absurd. So why, even when you've done all the things that I've asked of you and you've done all the training, would you get to a platoon and think, I don't know, man, I don't know if I can hang with these guys? You literally did the exact same thing they all did to get there. But again, it's this, man, maybe this is a fluke. And you know, eventually they're going to figure out I'm a fraud and I'm not actually that tough and I'm not actually that hard. It's like, no, dude, you've done all of those things that are absurd. You are hard. You are tough. You are proficient. You were able to learn the trade just like they were and be tested on it and pass the milestones. And then the last one for me now is that idea of being a CEO, right? Like, you see all these like super versed CEOs that are, you know, writing books and doing speaking engagements. And you're like, oh, like that's a CEO. Like I'm even though I'm 11 years into this, we've produced a 0.0001% outcome as a company. Even in that context, I still am like, I'm not a real CEO. This is a fluke. You know what I mean? So I chew on that of like, how no matter how overwhelming the results can be in the positive and in how maybe like statistically difficult it would be to achieve that, you still put yourself in the, oh, it's a fluke. It's like, how many more things you have to do before you say, hey, maybe this is actually a track record related to my own efforts and my own abilities, right? And I don't say that in an arrogant way, but it's a little bit, you know, I don't want to say pathetic, but like, hey man, you do fucking belong here. Some of those other CEOs that you're like, you know, comparing yourself to, that you're actually better than they are. They raised $50 million in capital and had a private equity firm holding their hand the whole way. You know what I mean? You were active duty. Like, are you kidding me? You know what I mean? This thing was, you know, so I try to check myself on that a little bit, but just that idea of imposter syndrome and confidence and you know, so that's when they were talking about the insecure hyperachiever. And I think what happens is that leads the person to want to achieve the next thing, right? That, because then they think, okay, as soon as I do that, then like I can get, you know, then I can get rid of this, like, oh, I haven't done enough, you know? And that's when we get into, you know, the old delayed gratification that kind of merges those worlds together of like, okay, you have to be happy in the moment and not think that you can just you get one more accomplishment and then you're going to be good. I don't know. I reflect on that and I wonder if there's more people that maybe don't talk about it, but have felt similar insecurities, even though on paper you've achieved very elite things. And also from a performance standpoint, like, it doesn't mean you're not performing. It doesn't mean like you're not showing confidence, like doing CQC in the kill house, like to everyone else, like, you're freaking confident, you're squared away, you're fit, you're doing your job, but deep down, you know what I mean? You're about to pop that door open. You're like, fuck, like, I don't know if I'm skilled enough to be doing this, you know?
It's such, what you're saying is such a human thing. Like, I think different levels and everyone on their, now I think from the insecurity piece, I would be damn surprised if literally 100 out of 100 people, if we brought them in this room, wouldn't say, I can relate to that. The achievement piece is a unique one. Like people that channel through it, kind of channel that insecurity through achievement. Cause you see a lot of people that channel insecurity into victimhood. They channel it into, you can channel that into wherever, for each person that kind of displays itself as a different exterior. Whereas the kind of channel you're talking about is into hyperachievement. You've heard me say this before, the story, like the last 5 years of my life, the deepest thing I've been like self-reflecting on is the stories we tell ourselves, because it relates back exactly to what you're saying, is that we don't recognize how much of the stories we run in our consciousness on a day-to-day basis. Meaning, and when I say stories, let me just define that as in like that little voice that's talking in your head all the time. And this relates back to actually like kind of learning to get that to quiet down a little bit, not get rid of it. It's actually almost pulling it closer in a way where you recognize that there's something behind that, an awareness behind that. And there you would end up in another kind of like religious or spiritual kind of conversation of what is that that's actually behind that. But when you can get that to quiet down a little bit, you can start to recognize stories that you have running almost like a software in a computer, meaning like, or an algorithm that's running, that's leading to both how you perceive reality, then also how you engage with reality on a personal level, but then also on a relationship level as well. Like for me, just to like relate it to myself, I grew up around a lot. I mean, you know a little bit about where we grew up. Like we grew up in a very blue collar area, and like I'm very grateful for the values and kind of what I got exposed to at a young age. But like when it came to like men's relationship with women, there were a lot of just fucking like old school, like almost like Viking shit going on, where it's like there was no stability just from a lot of the men I was around. So like there, I'm bringing that up only because like that's a story I recognized within my own psyche that was like, whoa, you have this thing that was developed kind of between the ages of like 8 to 14 when you're starting to like even hit puberty, like get attractive to females. That is not what a real relationship is. So like when I started to really explore that, and what sucks though, or what's inconvenient would be the better word, is that when you recognize a story of like, oh, I'm telling myself a story about reality that I realize is a unique one to myself, and then you go to try to clean it up. And here's where, once again, psychedelics can be a great tool, or just a really good mentor or a counselor, or just friends, or being very self-reflective, is that it will, as you start to uncoil those stories, there's a little bit of identity death that has to happen with that, because you've built your identity surrounding that. So it takes a extreme level of courage to be able to go in, and even surrounding success or what it means to be like competent, or what you've built, to the story you've told yourself about insecurity and how you're going to solve that. When you go in there and delayer it, you'll start to recognize, at least from my experience, you'll recognize that a lot of what you're doing in reality is a result of a story that you no longer want. So then not only does the story have to change, your actions have to change. And that's kind of the living truth that I talked about in the first episode, is you recognize like, holy fuck, I'm doing this because mommy or daddy wanted me to do this. Or I'm doing this because I was confused at 11 and made a decision just because other people, or for me, when I was 15, of where are you going to college? What are you going to do? What you're definitely playing a sport. And it's like, I started to just adopt that, and then recognize later that like, I never really reflected on what I wanted to do. Do you know what I mean? It was always about like what my uncles and my dad and my mom wanted me to do. So this is just a long-winded way to say like, giving yourself an extreme level of like grace and humility and just almost acceptance. It's not about looking at your stories and saying like, get rid of that story. It's actually pulling that story so close to you, meaning like observing it so closely that you stop resisting. Like resistance is actually what causes extreme energetic exhaustion within your system. So when you can pull it closer and say, hey, I see you, like I see you story. And here's where people are gonna be like, wow, he sounds like a fucking crazy guy. Is that like pull a story close and say, hey, story of insecurity, like I see you there, but we're no longer using that as our operating system. Like, and then anytime those feelings bubble up, you kind of repeat that over time. And it will, the part that can be hard is that you'll recognize certain people, certain situations, certain life like habits or hobbies you used to enjoy start to fall away. And there's where I think the humility comes in to let those things pass. And that's why I said about like not trying to become a past version of yourself. It's almost about like what have I learned from those past experiences and how can I apply that to the new version of myself that I'm trying to step into? Because reflecting on, okay, let's use the competitive nature. It's like, where did that lead me, both good and bad? So like, let's use the extremely competitive, maybe resulting from insecurity. When I embodied that, what were the benefits of it, but what were the negatives and what was the end state that led me to? Because there, as you do that, you start to recognize like, oh, maybe I don't want to go just try to be that version of myself. I want to take 2 out of these 8 things, apply that to where I'm going. And then the other 6, let those fucking die.
Yeah.
So yeah, the stories, the stories we tell ourselves are so fucking powerful. And quite literally is what's shaping our reality. And it's wild that we never, I mean, if you're into psychology or you're into like different, there's even religious sects, like they do a great job of kind of like starting to deconstruct that, because what I've recognized too is you actually don't need to replace them with something. Meaning, I believe, and it relates back to kind of sinking into the moment, is that as you start to clear up these kind of like algorithms and stories that are running, it's not about taking one belief and swapping in a new one. So it's not about you going from like, oh, I was insecure at 14 because of my brothers, and saying like, I feel empowered. I'm a grounded, confident male now. It's actually let the story go and then recognize the less stories you run, the more access you have to reality, because you're not upholding this fucking like this false version in your head that you think you need to maintain. So it becomes like, let go of stories. They're going to come back. And that's where I say, it's not about saying like, no, story, you're not here anymore. It's like, give it love, pull it into you. But then as stories start to fall away, just let them go. And then recognize that you're within there. And there's where I say the spiritual thing would come in, or just a religious scaffolding, is that I think we all have a spark that as you clear those stories, there's a spark that starts to become your state that is less this fucking egregore of a bunch of different stories and more just like an innate human kind of spark to it. So yeah.
Yeah, man. It's a tough one because there's so much information out there. There's so much distraction. I just think about how, I think that's it's of course a blessing and a curse, and it's only going to get worse, right? In like for example, social media, and your props to you for not doing it. I just use Instagram. I don't use any of the other ones. A little bit of LinkedIn. I check it like once a week, but I don't really respond to anything. And LinkedIn's a little weird. But I had to install an app that blocks it during the workday, and it's actually awesome. It grays it out so you can't click on it. But part of me was like thinking like, how ridiculous is it that someone like me that, has done okay in life and has achieved a lot of things needs to pay $9.99 a month for an app that simply doesn't allow me to click on another app during the workday so I stay focused on my job? Like, you know what I mean? Like, has it come to that our systems have been overridden by these highly complex psychological machines that, you know what I mean, are now sitting in our hands that like someone that's, I would consider very strong-willed like myself, like even I have to, you know what I mean? And it's crazy because as we learn, from the, was it Mike Johnson, remember the psychology of the slot machines?
No, Michael Easter.
Yeah. Awesome episode. And, he talked about how the modern day slot machine, they have this giant lab in Nevada where it's a giant casino that's, it's got cameras and sensors everywhere, but all these other companies that are not related to the gambling world have people embedded to watch human behavior, and they have people with PhDs, and they're taking that back to these social media platforms. So if you think about your Instagram feed, it's literally a slot machine, but in your hand. You got the left to right, you got stories up above, you got the scroll down, you have little icons, little noises, oh, I got a new notification. Who just liked my photo? Oh, I got a message. Ooh, who's that? You know what I mean? That reward mechanism of, oh, maybe this could be something really cool. 9 times out of 10, it's not, but that one, so that keeps you coming back and you're scrolling because you don't know what the next scroll will reveal. Maybe it'll be something really cool, or, see what I'm like? It is wild that people really freaking smart know what they're doing. And of course they have the, time limit thing that, they're acting like they don't want you to be on the platform all day. And I think a lot of those things they have built in now are for future litigation when they, there's like a class action suit for $10 billion that can prove these were psychologically set up to get us addicted. So all those things we all click, yeah, never mind. And we override the little thing that says, you've been on Instagram too much today. But I think that's something that I don't really think it's anyone's fault, because it's clearly tapping into human behavior. They're building a house next door right now. They demoed the house and they're building a brand new one. And all these construction guys, they get there like 7 a.m. and I think they wait for the boss to show up. So they're all literally sitting out there on these pylons that were delivered. And I looked out there and there's 7 guys, got their work boots on, their hard hats. Guess what all 7 of them are doing? They're all looking down at their phone at 7 o'clock in the morning. And then there's 2 guys in trucks that are like the supervisors. When I drove by them when I was leaving, both of them were in their driver's seat, both looking down at their phone, right? That's not because those 9 guys are weak individuals or weak-minded. It's because the hooks are in them, like it is pretty much all of us. So I think that's the biggest thing we need to solve for. And I know we've talked about, it seems like the at least awareness is growing. Like, there's now apps that can help it. And we're talking about, okay, lock your phone up at night so you don't like distract from dinner. Like we're definitely fighting back, but I think that force is so powerful. And then then the idea of like the constant, what do they say? Comparison is the thief of joy or whatever. Like you talk about comparison, holy shit, social media. Like, you know what I mean? Oh, that guy's got a little bit better house, or, especially with girls, I think they get insecure about other girls that are like prettier, or, and especially raising a daughter now, like that terrifies me. Like when she's 15, if she has Instagram, like she's screwed. You know what I mean? Because of me at 37 am getting affected by it. Imagine what a 15-year-old girl going through development and all these mixed emotions. And, so I just think that's something we need to keep an eye on. Obviously the AI is just wild. I just started diving into ChatGPT. I got the paid version and holy shit, man, I just went to an AI class a couple of days ago because I realized like I have to get good at this, because if I don't, I will be a dinosaur. And just what I've learned in 2 days, just messing around with ChatGPT, it's like, you can't even wrap your head around how incredible this machine is, right? And so that's going to lead to a whole nother thing that we can't even foresee yet. And it's going to come, it's not like 10 years, it's going to be like 2 years because it's advancing so fast. So yeah, I just, I think, we talk about just getting back to the basics, you know what I mean? And I think that taps into our innate, like evolutionary biology, right? It's like when you exert yourself, like if you go out and do yard work, right? For 4 or 5 hours, 3 or 4 hours, and you don't have your phone, and you come in and you're like dirty and you're sweaty, you feel awesome. You know what I mean? Because that's tapping on into your evolutionary biology of how you were meant to be.
Yep.
And so things like that, I just think, man, it's there's so much good with the advancement of technology and the modern comforts, but I'm seeing major issues. Like we've never lived in a more comfortable society than right now in this exact moment. Never had better medical technology, the comforts, all these, the interconnectedness. You fly anywhere you want in the world. You have air conditioning, all these things. And as a society, we've never been more unhappy. So what does that tell you? None of these things are actually supplying that happiness. It's got to go deeper. And
what you said is, and how I view it is like the myth that we're creating now. And I'll define myth as just like the story as a humanity that we're creating. And you've heard me nerd out about this. Is like a lot of where my passion comes from outside of like the business world is centered around kind of course correcting that myth a little bit, because the myth we're writing right now is, and actually let me back up one step. Our attention has become, and this isn't new, this has been for hundreds of years, but like our attention is the biggest commodity, meaning like our attention, another second on a paid ad, what does that result in? Do you know what I mean? For these huge companies. So I'm not saying that is bad, but the myth we're creating right now is that we are going to let a few individuals steer humanity in a way where we are disconnecting further and further from our human elements that make us human. And that's where like, you get into the worlds of alternate reality and what that's going to do. So we're at a precipice with ChatGPT and all of these different things where if we don't start viewing them as tools, meaning like things that we should use to further benefit the deepening of the human experience. And I think we talked about a couple people we talked with to them about this, is that our myth this is gonna be a fucking ugly myth in a couple hundred years that they look back on. And I don't mean to sound pessimistic, but there are parts of me that feel that way if we just keep carrying on in this direction. I'm not saying we shouldn't use them, but the basis of what we're doing, and that's why I actually do think RFK is kind of an archetype of somebody that is actually doing something that's trying to set up a better, healthier future for our kids and our society. Meaning, we could integrate these technologies in a way that does further drive people into making healthier decisions. The issue is it's a lot of times the opposite. Use like the gambling example. I'm not saying gambling should be illegal, but when you look at what that's doing to individuals, you're tapping into their awareness, which is why I say it's the biggest commodity, is like you're basically stealing somebody's conscious awareness to benefit financially from that without providing any value to them at all. Now, if they win money, you could make the argument that they're, of course, winning money. Whereas like we have things that need fucking solved for right now, meaning like, and that's why I bring up the RFK is like, we're 52% of our children are obese. Like we should be solving for that more than AI, or AI should be contributing to that. So there's where I'm not saying that these things are inherently bad, but what I'm seeing is that there's an imbalance in the use of these where it all is about just making more money, which once again, as a businessman, yes, you need to set up a system that is sustainable from a financial aspect. But the overarching why has nothing to do with creating a myth where we are evolving as human beings. And it's creating a myth where technology is actually evolving and we're just kind of the resource that's getting sucked out of in order to create that. So that's like, it kind of ends up sounding very Matrix-like, but it honestly, there's flavors of it that from my kind of observation of it, where we've got to get very clear about like how I frame it in my mind is birthing these technologies, meaning like almost treating it like a child of like, yeah, you don't just fucking have a kid and then let it just like, okay, you're in charge now. It's like, no, we as the creators of them, like we have to be very intentional with what the use is. Now, it's easy to sit here and pontificate on that. I understand like once the fucking thing's out of the bag, it's like, how do you do that? And it's like there leads back to good leadership, which I'm sorry, like I can point to a select few that I think have the courage to actually at least have the conversation. But then you get to, it's like when Zuckerberg went in front of fucking Congress, it's like the questions they were asking him, they're 70-year-olds. They have no fucking clue even how to have a conversation with a guy like that. So then you get into the conundrum of like, even where the conversation should be happening, there's a level of incompetency that the conversation can't take place.
Yeah.
So I love that you're actually exposing yourself to it because like we are the leaders of the future and like you need to stay. This isn't about like, I don't use that. Even social media for me, as much as I don't have like a personal presence, I still understand it because I think it's important to evolve alongside of it, but have boundaries for it. But I like that you're doing that because we need people that know how to use it. Don't view it as bad or good, but just have like, okay, here are the left and right limits of this. Because as you said, in 2 years, if we aren't educating young children on how to like utilize these things, we're going to be living in a completely different alternate reality. And maybe that's inevitable, but for me, it's like I just think you can have the best of both worlds. I think you can use these technologies in a way that benefit humanity and allow more time for people to explore what they actually want to do in this world. But we're also there's very obvious examples where we're trending in a direction where literally people are just going to plug into these things and use their time to just live in an alternate reality outside of what's happening now.
Yeah, well, people are starting to have relationships with chat.
It's crazy.
You know, seriously.
I know.
And it's brilliant at learning like about you and stuff like that. And yeah, we got to use it for the good. You should, if you're not using it, like no. I'll just give you the quick. I've been debating selling a couple of my properties. And I'm like, man, should I just sell it and take the money and put it in the S&P 500 and just let it rip? Or should I keep doing with this? Now I have a property management company. So it's like, it doesn't really take up any of my own bandwidth, but occasionally things come up that are a little bit stressful. Like, oh, the AC unit's got to get replaced. That's gonna be 20 grand. So it's not like it's completely hands off. And so I was like weighing like, man, like one, financially, what these two outcomes look like 20 years from now. But two, also like weighing in like, so I just put in a quick scenario. I was like, hey, here's these two property guys I have. Here's the total equity I have on the properties. First off, I prompted it, consider yourself a expert in financial advice as well as with specific expertise in like the real estate world, right? Blah, blah, blah. Like you can tell it what it should be a good in, which is wild. And that's what I got from the class. And I said, all right, here's the scenario. First off, let's look up real estate appreciation rate in Virginia Beach over the last 30 years. What's that? Okay, it's 4.67%. Okay, got it. That's what we're going to use. All right, so if I were to sell it right now and take this equity, let's say it's $1 million and put it in the S&P 500 versus continuing to rent a property, let's cash flows, let's say 50 grand a year after mortgage is paid and everything, and it's going to appreciate at 4.67%, and then I'm going to sell it at year 20. taking into account capital gains and all these other things, like build me a financial comparison of those two scenarios and what do you recommend, right? And it was doing it, man. And then you can tweak it. Oh, okay, let's use 4.5% instead of 4.67 just to be conservative. And it'll let's for the S&P 500, let's do a 10% annual return average. And okay, do 8%. That's a little bit more conservative. Let's see. And dude, I did this in 20 minutes, and it gave me an Excel spreadsheet that broke everything down. Unreal. And they actually turned out to be a pretty similar financial outcome within a couple $100,000. And so I said, hey, this is interesting. It looks like it's a very similar financial outcome. Like, which one would you recommend? Right? I just said, see what it's got. And it laid out all these different reasons, like risk mitigation, like diversifying your investments. How much do you already have in real estate? You should consider that. Is there risk at, someone injuring themselves in your property and you getting sued for that? What does your insurance look like? How much time are you spending managing this property? Does it stress you out? Like, it literally gave me all these, and this is a machine telling me this. And these are great things to consider. And that was literally the first time I've ever used it. And in 20 minutes, 6 o'clock in the morning, drinking my coffee, I was like, wow, this is freaking awesome. And I'm just even scraping the surface. So,
but that's I use it as well that is the perfect example of how to use it, because you have a level of competency where you're not asking it to do something for you. The danger lies in, like, and this is well known as well too now, is that, like, there are engineering students that are going through college that are using it for like 60% of their
course, their coding and everything.
So there's the level of, like, and that's how I use it too. I'll type with my eyes closed. So I'll type a full paragraph with my eyes closed, because then I know I don't need to worry about punctuation and stuff, because my grammar is okay. And then I'll take that paragraph and say, clean this up.
Oh, really?
And then you're getting the exact
Secrets
essence.
out.
You're getting the exact essence of what you use, but it adds your commas. It speeds you up so much. So you're not sitting there like, is this a comma here? Is this a semicolon? But I bring that up too, is because I can do that because what I'm trying to type is in my head, and it's just cleaning it up for me. And in your case, you're doing an analysis that you could do on your own. You're smart enough to do that on your own, but it saves you 5 hours of time 100%. To do it. That is where the efficiency of use is perfect. Where I think there has to be some level of caution is just when it's being used. It's being used to not have to then think on your own. You know what I mean? And that's the line. And there's where I say, like, there's no fucking easy solve to this. Like, as far as how to do, other than maybe having systems that counter the use of it in certain scenarios. But, like, I think if we have in the next, and I'm just making numbers up, of course, say we have 50,000 civil engineers over the next 3 years that graduate college. And out of those, 60% used ChatGPT for 60% of their curriculum. It's like the degradation that then happens to a society based off people no longer having to be competent themselves. Now, if AI starts to replace the roles themselves, then you have another kind of thought experiment. But yeah, it's just a way that, like, for developing minds to have that, it scares me a little bit, because you don't have to learn to think anymore. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think, dude, that model,
it's crazy.
It punched out in 4 seconds.
Did you do a deep research or just a normal one?
I just have the $20 a month one. I don't have the deep research one.
Okay.
It literally punched out an Excel sheet in 5 seconds. And then I said, well, hey, what average return did you use for the S&P 500? Oh, I used historically an average of 6.88%, which is super conservative. Would you like me to change it? Yes, do 8%. 2 seconds later, 8%. Actually, let's do 10%, because over a 30-year horizon, that's probably going to be what I get. Okay, boom. You know what I mean? And it literally, over 5 seconds, that would have taken me 4 hours, right? Crazy. I would have had to build a spreadsheet. I would have had all these different scenarios. I had to do research. Imagine me trying to figure out down to the 100th%, what is the average property appreciation rate in Virginia Beach over the last 30 years, particularly coastal properties that are, like, on the water? You know what I mean? Where do I find that? No fucking clue. I ask it, it punched out in half a second, right? It's wild, man. So, off on a tangent, but anyone, business owners particularly, but even, anyone, like, lean into this, because it can be a huge asset. But obviously we need to be a little bit careful that it doesn't replace our own ability to critical think. And that's why I like, the exercise I was doing. I was still providing kind of like the ass behind it of, like, all right, I have this scenario and here's the factors I want you to consider. Even the capital gains thing. I said, what would be my capital gains for both these scenarios? And it was like, well, based on this tax code, blah, 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 you're at 29.96%. So if you take that out, blah, 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 and here's what you pay in tax. And once that's taken into account, boom, here's your net result 20 years from now. It's fucking wild.
The perfect example though of how to use it.
And even legal precedent, right? You know, which is crazy, you know, for like professions where they have to be a specialist in very specific knowledge, like they're in trouble, man, because like you can find like, you know, it's for some of these bullshit lawsuits we're getting with Born Primitive. Like I was able to throw that in Chat GPT and get very quick precedent, like this one in the state of Florida. It was like, you know, here's precedent, here's this ruling that was in, you know, 2 years ago, and here's this, and here's why. And it literally what would have cost me $5,000 and multiple calls with lawyers and providing them all this information, punched it out in 8 minutes. And now, you know, and it's backed with evidence. So anyway, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but highly encourage people to lean into it. Let's see, we got probably a couple more minutes here, but I think for the final episode, you know, we're going to try to bring Mal in, and what I'd like to get in with her, to the extent she's comfortable, and maybe she's not, is maybe, you know, the shit that people don't see. And we've hit on this before, but obviously not everyone's listening to every episode on, you know, maybe the dark underbelly of being an entrepreneur, and particularly, you know, to the extent she's comfortable, like how that put a strain on our relationship when we were married, you know what I mean? Just what that looked like. And, you know, I figure to the extent we'll see how deep down that rabbit hole she wants to go, but also maybe just kind of some of the laughs over the years and some of those, man, like, can you remember when we did that? And remember we used to do this like this, you know, so hopefully it'll be a bit lighthearted, but you know, I want the final episode to be one just kind of looking back and, you know, maybe some lessons learned, but also, you know, stories like when we drank like 900 Coronas in the Dominican Republic and I had to take a moped into town when I thought I was getting jumped. I don't even remember. Dumb and Dumber style. I'm on the back of a moped. I gave you my location. I had a knife in my shoe, and I'm like,
you gave your location to me, who probably had 28 Coronas.
Yeah. You're 28 Coronas in, and we were.
I'm gonna do anything.
Farting underwater in the pool, and you're my. Hey, you're my. If anything goes wrong, all right, here's man, my dot.
I got you.
You have no vehicle to get there, but you know, looking back on the fun times like that, and you know, I was listening to a podcast about the different phases of businesses. And it was actually interesting because I think it's fairly accurate for us. You know, in the early phases, everyone's friends. You know what everyone else is doing, so it's very quickly to move and be agile because, like, you're in some senses you're literally in the same room. We were right, and eventually 2 rooms. But you remember, you know, Squadron Court.
Oh yeah.
And then you get to a phase where, you know, that system doesn't work anymore, and of course you have to start delegating and having, you know, different departments. But you're in these, I would say almost like you're going through puberty where like you haven't developed processes, infrastructure. You don't really know what you're doing in many ways. You're still very green. You know, you're getting by off of work ethic and grit and determination, but it's probably not been in the most efficient way. And that, you know, they called it like the third phase where you're growing, you know, you're north of 30 employees but you have all these problems. You have to deal with turnover and interpersonal relationships at work and HR issues. And it's all these problems that you didn't sign up for. And then you hopefully graduate out of that phase if you're fortunate enough to, you know, be in the 1% that, you know, gets bigger than that. But then you start to refine the organization. You start having process. You start bringing in unique talent that serves a specific role in an area that you could have never mastered, right? And you get really focused on what is actually driving the business, and you know what I mean, and you shed the fat, and that was kind of cool hearing that because I was like, man, that is us right now, right? And we're not fully there yet, but man, like, you know, you think about where we were as an organization a couple of years ago versus now, and I think that the takeaway for that was like, it wasn't anyone's fault. It wasn't the fact that we were bad leaders or bad practitioners of business. It's just because you've literally never done this before. Time. You know, it's like if you built a house for the first time and you didn't know any of the trades, like, of course it would be a shit show, right? But then, you know, when you go to build that second house, you'd be like, all right, we've done all of this. We now know what to do and know what not to do. Let's do it in a more efficient way. So that was really cool to kind of hear that and be like, man, yeah, we did kind of go through all those phases. And even with like friendships, right? Like when you have 9 employees, everyone's friends. We actually all hang out together because, you know what I mean? But now like that doesn't really happen. Now, of course, some employees hang out, but even little things like that. It's like, man, that was kind of cool to be able to like go out. Remember we'd like go to Chicks, right? Like
Shack, yeah.
we'd like, I'd be like, hey, tab's open if you guys want to come to Chicks, like, and we'd all go, right?
Yep.
So it's like that would never happen now. And that's fine. That's part of the evolution of it. But so maybe we can kind of, get into that a little bit with Mal and, hopefully just provide some insights and end it on a positive note. But I think, I'm good to end it there.
I think it's great because I think too, like just leadership, like I've been exploring this a lot is like how to balance there is an emotional labor that comes from leadership, meaning when you're managing people. Now, even when you're not managing people, if you're leading the organization, it comes from that too. And knowing how to kind of shed that emotional kind of, because there's the output labor, meaning like me showing up to my job, kind of putting together, even like, let's use the packet I gave you yesterday. Like that actually isn't the hard part of my job. Now that requires a level of like thinking big, a level of stepping outside of the box, and just the institutional knowledge I've built over 6 years. The hardest part about my job, and I think you guys can certainly relate to it, is the emotional labor side of it. And that it's what's funny is you can't measure it. Meaning like when you're managing when you're young in your career and you're managing a lot of people, there's an upholding you're having to do both from like a day-to-day interaction, but then as you mentioned, that it sounds like on the podcast they talk about like the interpersonal dynamics that are happening. Like it's not black and white that like, well, yeah, you report to me and you show up. It's like, no, you have to keep people excited. You have to keep them focused. You have to have a connection with them, but there's got to be a professional boundary. So like the energetic output that takes, and there it relates back to like, if you're not taking care of your own system, that can weigh you down very quickly because it's challenging. So I think Matt, like we've all went through different seasons of that. So I think that's something, it's like, it's the pros and cons of like leadership is like, it will give you more opportunity. You'll develop your people skills way better, but it can also break you if you're not very kind of aware and also have a good ground yourself, because then the answer isn't either to just be the one that's trying to please everyone, because then you're not benefiting the organization. Yeah, exactly. So I think walking that line, like Mal, I know her and I have talked about it, you and I have. So I think we can go deep on that. But yeah, we'll get her to open up.
We'll see.
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
All right, y'all. Well, hey, tune in part 3. That'll come out next week. That'll be our final episode of the podcast, at least for now.
Yeah. And if you didn't hear the announcement about the podcast, go back to part 1 of this, just so you know what the hell we're talking about, but it'll give you the context.
All right. That's a wrap.